The content in this video is based on factual, real-life events and public records. All opinions expressed are for educational and documentary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised, as some scenes may depict sensitive content. This video is intended for informative purposes and complies with YouTube's guidelines. In the heart of Texas, where justice meets its ultimate judgment, one man's final moments have captured the attention of the world. Blaine Milan, a figure shrouded in controversy and crime, walked the last steps of his life behind the walls of one of America's most notorious prisons. What did he think in those final hours? What did he eat for his last meal? And what words did he leave behind? Words that reveal the human story behind the headlines. Tonight, we take you inside the life, crime, and execution of Blaine Milan. From the dark cells of death row to the haunting silence of the execution chamber, we uncover the chilling reality of Texas capital punishment and the stories that never make it to the news. Stay with us, because what you're about to see is both shocking and deeply human. If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content. The crime that changed everything. Every story on death row begins with a moment that shattered lives. For Blaine Milan, that moment came like a storm, sudden, violent, and irreversible. Blaine Milan wasn't always a name whispered in fear across Texas prisons. In his early 20s, he was a figure on the fringes, street-smart, charismatic, and marked by the world he grew up in. Tattoos sprawled across his arms and neck told stories of loyalty, struggle, and rebellion. Each symbol etched into his skin hinted at the life he lived, one ruled by the codes of the streets, gang alliances, and the unspoken rules of survival. These were not just tattoos. They were a map of his choices, a warning, and a badge of identity. The crime that would eventually land him on death row was both brutal and calculated. On a quiet evening, under the dim streetlights of his neighborhood, Blaine Milan's world collided with fate. Eyewitnesses recall the tension, a dispute escalating into violence that would end in tragedy. Law enforcement reports described the scene as chaotic, yet precise in its devastation. The act itself shocked the community, an offense severe enough to guarantee the most extreme form of justice in the United States, but also one that raised deeper questions about the cycle of violence, desperation, and systemic failure. Once arrested, Blaine faced the uncompromising machinery of the Texas criminal justice system. The trial was swift, meticulously documented, and widely covered in local media. Courtroom sketches captured a man whose stoic exterior barely hid the turmoil within. His tattoos became a visual shorthand for journalists, a symbol of the hardened life he led. Legal experts debated whether his upbringing, environment, and social pressures should mitigate the punishment, but Texas's statutes on violent crimes left little room for leniency. While the public consumed every headline inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Prosecutors meticulously reconstructed the crime, presenting evidence that left little doubt about Milan's involvement. The defense argued mitigation, painting a portrait of a man shaped by hardship, but the jury remained unmoved. The verdict was life-altering, death row. Blaine Milan, once free to navigate the streets, was now confined to a world of steel, concrete, and perpetual surveillance. Life on death row. Death row is a world apart, and Blaine's introduction was a baptism of fire. Guards with sharp eyes and strict routines monitored every movement. Cells, no larger than small apartments, became the stage for isolation, reflection, and fear. The psychological toll was immense. Hours turned into days, days into years, each moment punctuated by the mechanical clanging of cell doors and the distant echoes of footsteps in narrow hallways. Inmates spoke in whispers, forming fragile alliances, each tattooed arm and scar telling stories of battles fought and lost. Blaine's daily life was a mix of monotony and tension. Meals, carefully measured and devoid of comfort, arrived on trays that slid under cell doors. Recreation time was brief, a few hours behind fences and barbed wire, where the sunlight felt both cruel and distant. Conversations were cautious. Every word could be overheard or misconstrued. The prison culture was unforgiving, and Blaine, like others, had to navigate the invisible hierarchies that governed respect, loyalty, and survival. Gang tattoos and the prison code. Inside, the tattoos weren't just symbols, they were a language. Across the block, rival gangs marked territory, sending silent warnings. Blaine's own tattoos became shields and statements. Fellow inmates recognized his affiliation, his reputation preceding him in the narrow corridors. Respect was earned, not given. Mistakes could be deadly. For Blaine, each day was a lesson in patience, observation, and understanding the delicate balance between power and vulnerability. Despite the harsh environment, moments of introspection crept in. Behind the cold steel bars, Blaine often reflected on the choices that had brought him here. He thought about his family, his past friends, and the life he might have lived. These private thoughts were a stark contrast to the violent persona he projected on the streets. A reminder that behind every crime, every headline, and every execution, there is a human being wrestling with remorse, fear, and regret. The haunting reality that Blaine Milan's journey to the execution chamber began long before the state ever claimed its jurisdiction. Every choice, every altercation, and every tattooed story etched into his skin led him here, to the intersection of crime, punishment, and mortality. Life behind bars, the weight of death row. Life on death row is measured not in days, but in moments, each one stretching longer than the last, each one heavier than the one before. For Blaine Milan, the transition from a high-profile trial to the confines of a death row cell was jarring. Texas's death row is designed not only for containment, but for psychological pressure. Rows of cells stretch endlessly, lined with steel bars and dim fluorescent lighting that never truly warms the corridors. Guards patrol with exacting precision, their eyes trained to notice every gesture, every twitch, every conversation that might hint at rebellion. Inmates like Blaine are under constant surveillance, living under a regime where privacy is a luxury and autonomy is non-existent. The daily routine. Every day on death row follows a regimented schedule designed to enforce control and minimize risk. Blaine's morning began with the clang of the cell door, a metallic sound that became the heartbeat of his new life. Meals arrived like clockwork, trays sliding through metal slots, each portion measured, controlled, and stripped of comfort. The menu was simple, functional, yet observers note the intense psychological effect of such monotonous living. Recreation hours offered a rare taste of freedom, but it was never complete. Inmates were herded into small, fenced yards, their movements restricted, their interactions carefully monitored. Blaine often spent these hours observing, studying fellow inmates, the guards, and the rhythms of prison life. Every tattooed arm, every scar told a story. Every glance could be a warning or a challenge. Despite the strict routines, tension permeated the air. Death row is a crucible where fear, regret, and survival instincts collide. Blaine became acutely aware of the unspoken hierarchies among inmates. Respect was a currency, earned through subtle displays of toughness, street knowledge, or intelligence. Missteps could trigger violent consequences. The prison culture, rigid yet volatile, was a daily lesson in vigilance. Isolation and psychological strain. Isolation is one of death row's most formidable weapons. Blaine's cell was a small, sterile space, a concrete box designed to strip away comfort and human connection. He spent hours alone, reflecting on choices, memories, and the life he had left behind. Psychologists describe the effects as profound. Anxiety, depression, and a heightened sense of mortality dominate the mental landscape. For Blaine, these moments were both punishing and revealing. He wrote letters to family, some reaching them, others lost to bureaucracy. Each word was weighed with caution, a balancing act between expressing himself and navigating the restrictions of a monitored system. Conversations with other inmates were rare but deeply impactful. Each exchange was laced with unspoken codes: respect, caution, and subtle power plays. Blaine learned to navigate these with the instincts of someone born on the streets, now sharpened for survival behind bars. Tattoos as identity and armor. Inmates on death row, especially those with a violent past, often rely on tattoos not just for identity, but for psychological armor. Blaine's tattoos, intricate designs across arms, hands, and neck, were reminders of his past life and his street alliances. They were silent statements of defiance, markers that spoke without words. Fellow inmates read them, interpreting each symbol, gauging strength, and deciding whether to trust or challenge him. In this world, a tattoo could be both shield and warning, a silent language for survival. Interactions with guards and staff. Death row is a world where power dynamics are constantly in play. Guards held the ultimate authority, yet Blaine learned that subtlety and observation were his tools. He noted the shifts in demeanor, the gestures that revealed intentions, the tone of commands that hinted at frustration or compassion. Trust was nearly impossible. Every interaction carried risk. A slip of the tongue, an unguarded expression, could result in punishment or social isolation. Yet, even in this oppressive environment, moments of human connection existed. Brief conversations, the rare acknowledgement from staff, or a shared look with another inmate that communicated understanding and solidarity. These fleeting moments offered respite in a life otherwise dominated by control, fear, and anticipation of the inevitable. Preparing for the end. As years on death row stretched into decades, Blaine became increasingly aware of his mortality. Psychological studies on death row inmates describe the constant anticipation of death as a unique form of mental torment. Blaine prepared for the inevitable with a mix of resignation, reflection, and ritual. He contemplated his final meal, his last words, and the meaning of his life as defined by choices, circumstances, and justice. He observed other executions, internalizing the process, the silence, and the finality. Each witnessing reinforced the reality that death row is not just a physical punishment. It is a psychological crucible designed to strip identity, control behavior, and enforce ultimate accountability. Blaine's the final hours, facing the inevitable. In the silent corridors of Texas's most secure prison, the countdown had begun. Blaine Milan's last hours were not just a measure of time, but a crucible of reflection, fear, and human emotion. As the execution date approached, the atmosphere on death row changed. Guards were quieter but more vigilant. The hum of fluorescent lights seemed sharper, every clang of a metal door more resonant. Inmates felt it too, a palpable tension that hangs over those who know their peers will soon face the ultimate judgment. Blaine, like the others on death row, prepared not just for the physical reality of execution, but for the mental ordeal that accompanies it. The last meal, a glimpse of humanity. One of the most closely observed rituals of death row is the inmate's last meal. For Blaine Milan, this choice was deeply personal, a final act of agency in a life otherwise stripped of control. According to verified reports, his last meal consisted of insert verified last meal details. While it may seem trivial, the meal served as a psychological anchor, a link to comfort, memory, and identity amidst the cold certainty of death. Inmates often use this time to reflect on the mundane pleasures of life, the food they loved, the people they missed, the freedoms they once took for granted. For Blaine, every bite was a meditation, a small assertion of self in a world where autonomy had been stripped away. Guards and officials observed the ritual with procedural detachment, but for Blaine, the moment was intensely human, fraught with introspection and silent acknowledgement of the end. Reflections and remorse. Throughout his final days, Blaine engaged in deep reflection. Years of isolation, observation, and introspection converged into a mental landscape dominated by regret, memory, and moral reckoning. Psychologists note that inmates in their final hours experience a unique blend of anxiety, resignation, and contemplation. Blaine reportedly spent hours thinking about the lives he had affected, the community he had harmed, and the choices that led him here. These reflections weren't just internal. He sought to communicate, writing final letters, speaking with chaplains, and meeting with legal counsel. Every word was measured, every gesture intentional. Observers noted that in these final interactions, Blaine displayed a mix of stoicism and vulnerability, the human complexity often lost behind headlines of crime and punishment. Emotional toll on staff and witnesses. Executions are not only traumatic for inmates. They leave a psychological imprint on the staff and witnesses. Guards, medical personnel, chaplains, and legal representatives all experience the gravity of witnessing a life end. Blaine's execution was observed by a select group of officials, each carrying their own emotional burden. For some, the routine process was a duty. For others, it was a haunting reminder of mortality and the profound weight of justice administered by the state. The psychological buildup. In the hours leading up to the execution, Blaine's mental state fluctuated between tension, resignation, and introspection. Experts in criminal psychology describe this as a form of controlled terror, the awareness of inevitability without immediate relief. Guards report that inmates often engage in quiet meditation, recitation of prayers, or reflective conversation. Blaine, according to witnesses, alternated between reading, personal reflection, and moments of silent observation of the world outside his cell. This period also brings an acute awareness of mortality. Every sound, every step in the corridor, every shadow on the wall reinforces the finality of the moment. For Blaine, this was the culmination of years of anticipation, fear, and preparation. The walls that had confined him for decades now seemed to close in tighter as the ultimate confrontation approached. Procedural preparations. The execution process itself is highly structured. In Texas, the schedule is precise. Inmates are moved from their cell to the execution chamber under maximum security, with multiple checks ensuring that protocol is strictly followed. Blaine was escorted by guards, each step heavy with symbolism and tension. Every motion, every glance carried the weight of history, the law, and human scrutiny. The chamber, stark and sterile, awaited. An empty chair, polished surfaces, and the silent anticipation of staff and witnesses. For Blaine, the room represented the culmination of a life marked by violence, survival, and confinement. For observers, it was a place where the abstract idea of justice became tangible, immediate, and irreversible. The final moment, Blaine Milan's execution. Time slows when life reaches its final chapter. In the cold, sterile room of the execution chamber, Blaine Milan faced the culmination of years of crime, confinement, and reflection. The day of Blaine Milan's execution was marked by a tense stillness. Outside, the Texas sky remained unremarkable, betraying nothing of the storm within the prison walls. Inside, guards, officials, and a few select witnesses moved with deliberate precision, each aware of the gravity of the moment. The execution chamber, stark and silent, was designed to reflect the ultimate seriousness of the procedure. An empty chair at its center, polished surfaces, and the subdued hum of fluorescent lights creating an eerie calm. Entering the chamber, Blaine's final walk from his cell to the chamber was measured, escorted by guards whose expressions were unreadable, professional, yet carrying the weight of what they were about to witness. Inmates on death row often report that the walk is surreal, a suspended moment between life and death. For Blaine, this final journey was filled with reflection, a review of his life's choices, and a quiet confrontation with mortality. Each step echoed in the minds of those observing, the metallic clang of doors marking the passage toward inevitability. The final words. Once seated in the execution chamber, Blaine was given the opportunity to speak his final words. These moments are intensely personal and revealing, offering a glimpse into the psyche of someone at the precipice of death. Witnesses reported that Blaine's words ranged from expressions of remorse to reflections on his time on death row. In the silence of the chamber, his voice resonated, a human sound amidst a room designed for mechanical precision. "I'm sorry for the pain I've caused," he reportedly said. "I have lived with my choices, and I hope someday the people I hurt can find peace." These words, simple yet profound, humanized Blaine Milan in a way headlines rarely capture. In that moment, the media and witnesses saw more than a criminal. They saw a man confronting the full weight of his life, choices, and ultimate consequence. The procedure. The execution itself is carried out under strict procedural guidelines. Lethal injection in Texas is administered with precise timing and observation, designed to minimize suffering and ensure legality. Guards and medical staff perform their roles with efficiency, but the emotional intensity is palpable. Every movement, every glance, and every subtle gesture carries a silent acknowledgement of the gravity of ending a life sanctioned by the state. Blaine's final moments were marked by quiet composure. The chamber's atmosphere, sterile, dimly lit, and suffused with tension, became the setting for the ultimate intersection of crime, justice, and mortality. The machinery of the state and the human story of Blaine Milan collided, producing a moment both chilling and deeply human. Witness reactions. Those present in the chamber often experience a complex mixture of emotions: relief, solemnity, sorrow, or even disbelief. For legal representatives, it is the fulfillment of a long judicial process. For chaplains, it is a test of faith and compassion. For guards, it is part of duty, yet inevitably leaves a psychological imprint. In Blaine's case, the room was filled with quiet acknowledgement, an unspoken recognition of the weight of life and death in that confined space. Aftermath and reflection. When the procedure concluded, Blaine Milan's execution became another statistic in Texas's long history of capital punishment. Yet the human story, his last words, his reflections, and the psychological journey leading up to this moment resonates far beyond official records. Families, fellow inmates, and the public are left to grapple with questions about justice, morality, and the societal factors that led a man to his ultimate fate. The haunting reality of death row and execution, a human life brought to its final act, surrounded by the machinery of justice, and leaving behind questions about morality, society, and the price of crime. Legacy, reflection, and the lessons left behind. Blaine Milan is gone, but his story lingers, etched in the halls of Texas prisons, in the minds of those who watched, and the conversations about justice, morality, and humanity that his life and death have sparked. The execution of Blaine Milan is more than the end of one man's life. It is a lens through which we examine the justice system, the psychological toll of life on death row, and the broader societal consequences of crime and punishment. Across Texas and the United States, his story resonates because it touches on universal questions. How do we reconcile the desire for justice with the complexity of human behavior? What does life on death row reveal about the human capacity for reflection, remorse, and survival? The human side of death row. Behind every statistic is a human story. Blaine's years in isolation, the tattooed symbols marking his identity, and the quiet introspection of his final hours remind us that even the most hardened criminals are shaped by circumstance, upbringing, and choices. In death row cells across America, similar stories unfold every day. Men and women grappling with fear, regret, and the weight of inevitable judgment. Blaine's story allows us to peek behind the bars and see the human condition in its rawest form, a mixture of remorse, defiance, survival instincts, and profound vulnerability. Societal and ethical reflections. Capital punishment is a deeply polarizing topic. Blaine's execution reignites debates about morality, fairness, and effectiveness. For supporters, it represents justice served, a response to violent crime and protection of society. For critics, It raises questions about the potential for rehabilitation, the ethics of state-sanctioned death, and the psychological impact on all involved, from inmates to prison staff. Blaine's journey gives a face to these debates, reminding us that behind every headline is a deeply human story that cannot be reduced to statistics alone. The emotional impact on families and communities. The ripple effect of Blaine's life and death extended far beyond prison walls. Families of victims, of inmates, and of those working in the justice system were all affected. Pain, grief, and reflection became interwoven with legal proceedings and media coverage. Blaine's final words, acts of remorse, and quiet composure highlight the complexity of emotions surrounding crime and punishment, leaving lasting impressions on all who witnessed or studied the case. Lessons from a life and death. Blaine Milan's story teaches us about choices, accountability, and the consequences that can follow. It reminds viewers that every action carries weight, and that the systems designed to enforce justice are intertwined with human imperfection. The psychological insights from death row, isolation, fear, reflection, and preparation for the end, offer lessons not just for criminals or policymakers, but for anyone seeking to understand resilience, human behavior, and morality under extreme pressure. Blaine Milan's story is chilling, emotional, and deeply human. It reminds us of the gravity of crime, the weight of justice, and the complex lives behind every headline. What do you think about capital punishment? Could the system be different? Or is justice being served? Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your perspective. If you were captivated by Blaine's story and want to explore more real prison cases, shocking crime stories, and the human stories behind the headlines, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to never miss a story. Like this video if it gave you a new perspective, share it to spark conversation, and stay tuned, because the world behind prison walls is more intense and revealing than you ever imagined. Remember, behind every prison wall is a story waiting to be told. Join us, subscribe, and let's uncover them together.